Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Let's talk money.
And welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Look at that, I'm already tripping over my tongue and we're all of like 3 seconds into it. So one big source of stress in relationships tends to be money. Tonight we're going to discuss what to do when your partner has a different spending style than you. And joining us tonight is Elle Martinez of CoupleMoney.com and the Couple Money podcast. Welcome to our show, Elle.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about couples and finance, right up my alley.
We're excited to have you. And we'll jump into it in a little bit, but I'd like to introduce the Money Mastermind Show, the people who keep everything together here. And we have Kyle Prevost of youngandthrifty.ca, Miranda Marquette of Planting Money Seeds, Peter Anderson of Bible Money Matters, and Tom Drake of the Canadian Finance Blog. And before, I know I said we were going to jump right into it, but if anybody's out there and you're on our event page, if you have any questions about relationships and money and what you should do, especially if it's regarding spending styles, ask us a question. We'd love to answer them. Head over to the event page. There's a Q&A app on there, and it'll pop up here, and we'll be able to answer your questions. So, love in a committed relationship. It's all lovey-dovey, gooey feelings. Everything's happening. You know, it's like an early season from Bambi. Part of that is all the music's going on, but then something happens, and you discover you guys are not seeing things on the same level regarding money. And for a lot of couples, that's a huge, huge source of friction. So, and I'm not talking about having different amounts of money, but just different spending habits. What do you do? What do you do when you have all these different ideas about that and you're already in the relationship? What do you think, Elle?
That's a good question. And I'm first going to start off with like personal experience, because my husband and I, when we were engaged, we decided, okay, we're going to do the responsible thing and we're going to talk about money. And at that time, it really felt like, well, I thought we were basically on the same page. We had the same spending habits. We were working college students. We were doing pretty well. Weren't spending a lot of money. So on the surface, it looked like we were doing great. But then when we looked at the numbers, it was completely different. And I have to say, I was the one that was in debt. He was the one that paid everything with cash. He had some savings, and he had a very small after the grace period ended. And that's when I discovered that I had way too much debt for this relationship. I had the credit cards, the car loan, the student loan, and it was going to be a while before that got paid off. So I totally understand when you're already in a relationship and you guys have fallen for each other, and then you realize, wait, we're not exactly eye to eye. The first step, honestly, is just to talk it out and be transparent. I think, you know, we have this idea of having shame or embarrassment if we're in a bad financial situation. But one of the best things you can do as a couple is to be open with each other.
And then I think that's sometimes a hard thing to do, especially with money, because when you're in debt or you have maybe habits that aren't the best. I don't want to say bad habits. I don't want people to think that they're bad because maybe they owe a little bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
But then you worry about what the other person's going to say and what they're going to do. You know, I think that's a big fear for people. You know, like if I tell you, you know what, things are going great, but I'm 10 grand in the hole. Just want you to know that. You know,
right away.
Or you're not going to love me anymore. You know. So how do you broach that with people? You know, how do you set up that framework so that you know that you can trust your other partner to start talking about that?
So
that you're not even afraid. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. But that you're not afraid to talk about that.
I first of all, like I said, I totally, being on the other end of the awkward conversation, I know how people feel and I know how scary it is. But my advice is maybe if you're afraid to give the exact number, let's start off with the situation. Just have a first conversation about, okay, this is where I am with my money. And you might say, okay, I do have a credit card debt. I have some credit card debt or a car loan. And this is what I want to do. I want to fix it. And, of course, at some point, I'm not saying hide the numbers, but if that's kind of what's holding you back, start off small. I think a lot of times couples feel like you have to have everything done on that first conversation, or you have to tackle everything when you have a disagreement. And it is totally fine to just open up a little bit and know you can come back to it later. Take a time out to kind of like relax and gauge each other's feelings on it, because sometimes it is scary to talk about money and your habits, because a lot of times we come with these systems or these notions about money based on previous experience. So it took a long time to get to these habits, and it's going to take a long time to adjust them, especially if you're in a relationship.
Yeah, and coming from the other end of it too, if you're the person who has everything in order and all your ducks in a row, I think you need to be aware of how that other person may be a little bit hesitant to share all that stuff, because it is, when it comes to money is an emotional topic. And part of the reason for that is just because when it comes to money, a lot of times it's not about the money, it's about the emotions and everything that are wrapped up in the money. Some people will get their security from money. If they don't have money, they don't feel secure. And for a guy, sometimes it'll be because when they have money, they feel like more of a man and a provider or whatever. So there's a lot of other emotions and other psychological things that are going on in the background that you really need to be aware of when you're talking with your loved one about money. So you do need to come from that aspect of, hey, we're looking at these things not because I want to pile on you or anything like that. It's because I want to work towards a better future for us and work towards our shared goals down the line.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there, Peter, where it's not always the person who's in debt, but you could be on the other side of it too, and try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and maybe understand where they're coming from and kind of help them along to help them too, because you're in this relationship and the whole point is that you are in love and you do care about this other person. So how can the two of you come to meet in the middle? What if it does get inflamed? Like how do you keep it from being something that's not an all-out argument, war? How do you keep it civil between two people?
I think focusing on the why in this situation, especially if you're already established in this relationship and one might be revealing their financial, for lack of a better word, weakness, understanding why they got into this can give you some clarity, can give you a measure of understanding and make it easier to go forward. I'll just give a personal example. For myself, I did have credit card debt, but if you looked at how I was spending, not that it justified the spending, but I was using it to like give loans out to friends or family. That's what got me into the credit card debt. I was trying to help others. That wasn't a smart financial move, but that was my reasoning. And then, of course, my fiance and now husband at that time showed me that there are better ways to help people, whether it is financial or other, just saying no or how to say no. So sometimes just asking, well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Can kind of diffuse it a little bit. And like I said, sometimes if you have to kind of take a break and just say, okay, I know, you just found out I'm in a lot of debt right now. Maybe we can come back to it tomorrow. Just do what you can to get out as much as you need for that time, and then you can always come back and finish it. Don't feel like you have to do everything at once, but do ask questions like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Because I think you'll find it's easier to connect, especially if you're already in love with this person. If you're already, have a relationship, you want to help them out. That's a natural thing. So sometimes you have to step away from the numbers and look at the situation. I hope that makes sense.
No, I think you have some really valid points there. So you're already in the relationship. You already maybe have broached the subject. How do you start to come to agreements on how you're going to use money in the relationship? How are you going to work on spending? How do you come up with a system where the two of you can be better on the same page?
I think starting with the goals that you guys want to have. I think sometimes it is hard, and it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. The person that might be a little worse for money might feel like, okay, I need to step back and I'll just let you handle it. And that's not healthy at all. You want both of you to still be involved. Of course, there might be someone that's better with the budgeting, but you both have an input. So I would start off with something that's less stressful, a little less tension-filled. And what do you want to do? Okay, well, let's get rid of this high-interest debt first. And then what you're doing is you're framing the conversation less about, okay, you got us in debt, now we're stuck with this, and more as, okay, we're working as a team, and we're going to work together to get rid of this. So I think that's the first step, is to talk about your goals and why you want to. First of all, why do you want to get out of debt? You know, what do you want to have more freedom to? Maybe you want to stay at home with the kids. You know, maybe you want to start your own business. Kind of get into that conversation, and it's a lot easier than to, you know, go through the process of the numbers.
Right. And I don't think it even has to be just about debt. I think starting out and talking about what you have in common in your goals and what you're working toward together is a good starting point for any conversation about money, whether it's how much do I want to spend on retirement, where do you want to go on vacation this year. Everything has to start from that place of commonality, so that at least as you're starting, if things start to get heated and you start to like get angry or you have disagreements, you can at least step back and say, wait a minute, we have these shared goals, and these are the things we're working toward together. And I think that's a very important point that you made when you say start from your goals. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for me, I think almost even before you start with the goals, too, I read one author one time who talked about sit down and trying to understand where your partner is coming from and what money means to them. So, you know, talking to them, you know, why is money important to you? And for one person, it might be security, and somebody else, it might be freedom to do what they want, or another person might be, it's important because it means I can give more to my church, or whatever the case may be. So I think a lot of times it can be important to have that discussion first before even the goals. What's the meaning of money to you? And, you know, why is it important to have money or to make money or to get out of debt or whatever? Because otherwise, if you don't understand that basic part of it, you can almost be talking foreign languages because you're starting from a completely different starting point.
Yeah, and I think you brought up the point earlier about it being so emotional. I mean, for a lot of people, the whole money issue isn't always an easy thing that you can just turn on and off anyway. It's like, oh, I'm just going to stop spending. Oh, yeah, we're done. You know, if it were that easy, most people would, you know, maybe get into a little bit of debt and it would just end, right? So it's more of a process than anything else, right? I mean, if you're lucky, you could just say, well, it's not going to happen anymore, then, you know, good for you. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to be more of a gradual thing. Like, this is maybe how we have to maybe cut back, or this is how we have to allocate. But I also really like how you talk about goals, and like, even if it's just personal, you know, you put like a picture of that vacation, you go, look, this is what we want, what I want. But, you know, as a couple, you can say, hey, look, you know what, we want kids, we want the house, we want this, that, and the other thing. And then at least this way, you know, all your informed decisions, like, this is where it's going for. Do any of you have any particular like spending agreements in place, like how you would spend, or, you know, at what point do you discuss
started that? We started, like, I don't know if anyone else, but like in the beginning of our marriage again, like he was.
I'll cut out a little bit there. Maybe we could cut to somebody else here if they have any.
So I got kind of a non-romantic take on this. Everyone's been really constructive so far and having like really good ways of starting a conversation and working towards common goals. Is there a cut point? Is there a point where you cut bait and run and you say, look, I have strong feelings for this person, but like, we are totally incompatible and their spending is going to they're going to wreck me at some point, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems for our family down the road, both financial and sort of secondary. Is there a point? I've never reached this point, obviously, but I'm just wondering, in sort of anyone else's experience, is there some sort of tells that this might be the case?
I would say there would definitely be an extreme case, like a gambling and addiction, those secret accounts that people, might run up. What did Oprah? It was like someone had like $60,000 in debt, $100,000 in debt. Those are definitely drastic situations. But it still goes back to the why. Why are they having that problem? And usually when someone has a money problem, the root of it is something that has nothing to do with money. And so then, that becomes a question of, what do we have to do as a couple to work this out?
So like instead of it being maybe a money issue, it's really more of a character issue. And is this trait something that is still compatible with me, let's say, as far as keeping the relationship going? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I would say that when you understand the why, like why are they, behaving this way, it will give you a clearer idea of what your next course of action should be, because there could be a point, and just thinking in extremes, where you might have to have separate finances to protect your children, to make sure there's still a roof over the head. But you won't know that until you understand why are they behaving this way with their money. Because if they could be willing to change and they need a lot of help, or they could be still running behind your back with money. But you can't know what your next move is until you know what the current situation is, or try to get as clear of a picture.
Well, I think you make a good point about the idea of wanting to change. There's some, to a certain degree, you're like, oh, well, you shouldn't try and change somebody that you love. It's a terrible thing to do. But at the same time, if they have serious problems, like what you're talking about, they're hiding the money, they've got gambling problems, all that kind of stuff, then at some point you got to say, are you willing to change? Are you going to do something different with this? Because once it starts getting to the point where what you were talking about, where they're dragging you down with them and possibly dragging down your children with them, then you do. I mean, you kind of do have to cut bait and run. I just let it go, because you really don't want to bring that down.
I just pictured some blonde girl singing there.
Yeah, I can't hear those three words without thinking of Frozen. So.
Let it go.
Like Visa card statements flying in the air. Let it go.
But when Kyle brought up that point of when you cut bait, it brought up an interesting thing that I was thinking about. Is, does it matter if it's a marriage or if you're just in a committed relationship? I think if you've met somebody like last week and you've gone out on 3 dates and then you find out that, there's all sorts of crazy things going on, it's probably a little bit easier to cut bait, right? But certainly people have different ideas about being together. Obviously not everybody gets officially married. Some people stay together for decades and they never get married. Some people, depending on what state you're in, they can't get married yet. There's all sorts of different things happen. So does that play into things as far as your decisions about money and what you can do together as a couple? Or when do you just cut bait? Obviously if you're married, there's a little bit more involved in cutting bait. You have to get divorced. There's a legal procedure there. So, does that make a difference as to what type of relationship you're in?
I hate giving like this cut and dry line, because relationships, honestly, every relationship has its own DNA, every situation. But as a parent, I'm just going to speak personally. My children are very important to me, so I would do what I can. I love my husband. He's a good guy, so I'm just this hypothetical. But if it got to a situation where I had to make a decision, we have a, joint account, and we also have separate finances, but I would have to do what I could financially to make sure my kids are provided for here on this end. And then, we decide as a, separate decision, okay, are we going to work this relationship out? How's that going to go? And I think, again, I don't want to give reasons, but especially when you have kids involved, your responsibility as a parent is to make sure that they're taking care of the essentials. And as adults, you hope that you can sort of work with it. But that would be my line for me.
Yeah, for me, I've been in relationships before that were not marriage, and not to the point where we were sharing finances or anything like that. But for me, once I got married, that kind of ratcheted it up to another level. The amount of stuff I would be willing to go through, and I love my wife dearly, so I'd be willing to go through a whole lot more with her than I would have with a past girlfriend or whatever. So for me, it really comes back to, again, a lot of times we talk about there's money is kind of a smokescreen for other issues in a relationship, and it's really not about the money sometimes, and sometimes it may be that you need to go for marriage counseling or something along those lines to hash through some other more deeper issues, whether it's going back to your spouse's childhood or your childhood, or trying to figure out why you're engaging in certain behaviors with money. A lot of times it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with anger issues or other issues. So for me, I would do pretty much anything to help my wife and I get through a situation if she was having problems, and I hope she would do the same for me. So,
well, I think one of the things, though, too, before you get far enough along, before you get to the point where you move in together, or the point where you feel like you're really committed, or the point when you're married, I think one of the most important things you can do is talk about money, which is kind of what Elle was talking about at the beginning. If you talk about the money before you get to that point, then you don't have all these entanglements, and you don't have all these issues that you have to try and go through. There are some things that maybe I would have done differently. I married my husband 3 months after I met him, and we hadn't really talked about what mattered about our money and what mattered to us in terms of like values and how we wanted to use our money. So it was kind of this big surprise when we started going like, oh, wait a minute, this is not important to me, but it's important to you, and you're spending money on that because it's important to you, but I think it's a waste because it's not important to me. And so there were a lot of like big surprises because we didn't go through some of that discussion ahead of time. And the funny thing is we knew about each other's debt, we knew about each other's obligations, like from that on paper standpoint, but we hadn't talked about that why that we're kind of talking about now. We hadn't talked about what is the core of what really makes you tick. We're like, oh, well, we definitely want to save for retirement, but we never talked about, well, what kind of retirement would you be happy with, So I think you really have to have that conversation before you start getting too far into this committed relationship.
We've talked about it in other shows also, in how money, it tends to fall into this like other subject, like it's its own self-sustaining event, right? That doesn't pierce the shield of the rest of your life, but it really is holistic. So it's just kind of funny how, and I think a lot of people do it. We don't mention the money part of it for whatever reason, and we just kind of keep it at arm's length. But it really does affect everything else, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I definitely recommend for couples, when you decide you guys are going to combine finances, that you as quickly as possible come up with a financial situation where both of you are involved. Now, that I know some people have it where one person loves to do it, the day-to-day finances and handling everything, and that's fine, but both of you should have a say, and both of you should be notified. And nowadays it's easy. There's so many tools. You can even have text sent to you, so you constantly know what your balance is and you're in the know, so you don't get into these drastic situations or avoid it, where someone has been handling the family finances and it kind of got out of control, and now you're stuck with this huge amount of debt, or you're in a situation where you have maybe problems with your budget. So it really, as soon as possible, if you haven't already, just sit down and come up with a system that respects both of you and how you handle money. Both of you might not do the line-by-line budget, but both of you should have a say in that.
So do you think a couple should share accounts in finances? I mean, to help stay accountable, or at least both of you are kind of on top of things if you want to be? I mean, I know a lot of people have different pros and cons towards that.
I think, just personally, there should be you should have at least some joint accounts. The percentages are going to vary for the couple. My husband and I, most of our stuff is in joint accounts, and we have small individual accounts. But I think if you are sharing a life with someone, committed relationship, marriage, and you're planning for the future, you should have joint accounts, at least for those goals that you have. And you should both be aware of, at all times, what is the balance? Where are we financially at what point? And then, just check in with each other regularly. It doesn't have to be like, okay, let's sit down and look at the spreadsheets. You can have a glass of wine, relax, and, how did we do last month? And I think that's sometimes also the point. You're like, well, it seems like we're doing good. We haven't talked in 3 months. And then you realize you kind of been overspent. Both of you have been overspending, so you haven't met your goal. Try to make it a regular part of your routine, just to check in.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, I went out, cut back. And it doesn't have to be that big. It doesn't have to be that big issue because you have a regular communication system. And it gets easier. I'm not saying it starts off easy, but when you have that routine, okay, I know someone's looking at the account, every Friday, or I know someone's looking at this every month, it kind of helps to keep you accountable to stay within the budget. It's not perfect, but again, no relationship's perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but what can you do to work together and minimize getting into a huge financial mess?
I'm a big fan of using Mint for this because
yes.
I handle most of the finances, but I want my wife to be in the know. So I've got set up where we get the emails sort of with the summary, or if there's a large transaction or anything like that. So we obviously talk about the money too, but even just the automated portion of it, she gets an email, she can kind of see what we're doing, and then we discuss how we want to change the budget or anything from there.
Yeah. And see, there's so many free tools, which is awesome, that we can use, that it doesn't even have to be like, oh, I have to tell her, we only have 200 in the budget, or, oh, I have to tell him. They get the text, and then they'll text you like, hey, I noticed the balance is X amount, and so it kind of takes a little pressure off. It doesn't take the responsibility, but, take advantage of the tools that are out there. So you guys are regularly knowing where you are. I've seen too many times, and we've been guilty of it. You have kids or you have work. Just life in general keeps you busy, and you're kind of avoiding talking about money. But even if it's something like once a week, okay, are the accounts good? You log in, you see Mint, or you get the email, you feel better. It just takes away that tension, that pressure with the relationship, and you can focus again on the why, because no one wants well, maybe a few people, but no one really wants to count the pennies. No one wants to be the bad guy to say, okay, you need to stop spending here and there. We want to have money now to enjoy, and we want to have money later to enjoy.
Yeah, one simple fix for my wife and I is just, some people don't realize that you can put two people on the same credit card. You just get two cards and it's the same account. That's another reason why I'm a fan of rewards cards. We use it, like I've talked on other shows, for just about every purchase. It's really slick. Like you say, it's emailed to us every few $100s, however you want to set it up. It emails and says, hey, just so you know, your balance is X. And it's just nice. We give each other, whoever opens it up and takes a quick scan through at the end of the month, hands it to the other one whenever you get a chance to look it over. Just make sure that there's no errors on it, and it also sort of keeps you just in the loop as to what each other are spending, and there's no surprises.
Yeah, I like this idea where it's just the norm to do it. Like, it's not punitive. Not like I'm looking at the account and I see what you're doing. It's more like, now you have somebody else on your team to help you. The two of you can catch mistakes or make sure things are going the way they're supposed to be, as opposed to it being like one watching over the other one. So I think we were going. Good, Peter.
I was just saying, at our house we have the combined finances as well. We have the joint accounts and so forth, and we do that just because it tends to create more of a sense of unity, because we're both in the same accounts, able to see everything at the same time. It's just kind of the transparency and greater insight into our situation for both of us. And so I forgot where I was going with that, but I just the combined finances, the part I really like about it is because it is transparent. And I think when you run into issues with money in marriage, a lot of times it's because people are hiding things from each other. And when you're putting the money together like that, it makes it a lot harder for those kind of things to slip by.
Yeah.
You never have the doubt.
That also helps. And I just want to point out that sometimes, we say they're hiding the money or, there's problems with money. I'm not saying that people or, spouses or partners are intentionally trying to ruin their finances. It's, sometimes it comes off like that person's the bad guy, but by having at least some of the accounts joint or having notifications when both of you are in the loop, it really does prevent a lot of the big financial blow-ups. And, you do feel more comfortable. You have more accountability with one another.
Yeah, you're right. Like everybody has that maybe one little guilty pleasure, and you don't want to have to sit and explain it every time, right? Like, did you really need to spend such and such on that? And it's like, oh, come on, I just want to. So, I mean, is it a good idea to have that sort of agreement where you can spend a certain amount where, before another person has to be brought in to discuss it, having certain guidelines like that? Is that something that couples should do? Or is that something that you guys have done?
I think if all your accounts are joint, I think honestly that's necessary, because even though you are one, you're still two individuals. And like you point out, we all have different things we like to spend on. Like, I hate when they say one's a saver and one's a spender. You're both spenders. You just spend on different things. So don't call it like it is, and like for me, I love, just doing weekend getaways or spending on experience. And I admit I buy a ton of books on Amazon, and my husband is more the tech guy. And, if everything was joint, we definitely do that. For us, like 90% of our money goes into the joint accounts, and then we have 10% in our individual accounts, but we know what's in the individual accounts. There's nothing hidden there. It's just, that's our, for lack of a better word, blow money. And we just, we do what we want to do when, so I'm not rolling my eyeballs when I'm like, okay, another video card. Didn't you just buy a video card 6 months ago? Okay. I guess for, the new game, sure. And he's looking at me like, how many books can you possibly read? A lot. The answer's a lot, and I love it. But, that's what makes you happy. Again, it's keeping each other in the loop. But, you're not forsaking being who you are and what makes you happy. It's just making sure that your money situation reflects both of you and also reflects you as a cohesive unit.
I always thought it's also kind of fun to have a separate maybe credit card. Not that you could go and spend a lot of money, but if you want to do that thing like buy something for the anniversary or the birthday, you don't want your significant other going, oh, you spent such and such on that, like before the event happened. Yeah. Like sometimes there's a safe secret that you want to keep, not for the wrong reasons, but just because, sometimes you need to have that little bit that you can spend without so many eyes on it, at least just for a little while,
Yeah, and sometimes, with spouses, you're like, oh, no, you shouldn't have spent that much. You kind of want to take that away from, take that off the table and just let them know you thought about them. Like, I got my husband some nice scotch, and I'm sure he wouldn't have been thrilled if, I took out the joint account and saw how much that was. But, I saved up for it and got him as a gift, and he was so excited about it. And then afterwards he looked at it because he gets the notification. He's like, oh, it's delicious. It's worth every penny, but still.
Don't worry about it. It's paid for. And,
Yeah. Now you know, but yeah. I totally think you should have a little surprise money. I think it's a lot of fun. As a couple, you keep that in your relationship. Just, not a $10,000 surprise.
Here's an interesting situation I've seen sort of affect couples and their spending habits, and it can throw priorities out of whack. They've settled into a bit of an equilibrium as far as inputs and outputs, and they're comfortable. And then all of a sudden, one partner gets an inheritance. And I've read many articles like this. I've seen it in person a couple times where, for some reason, inheritance money gets treated differently in one person's mind from like regular earned money, and all of a sudden goals that they had like both thought they were working towards, it's like, oh no, either we need to spend all this now, or we don't need to spend any of it, or we need a bigger house all of a sudden. And I don't know, has anyone got any tips? Should you pre-plan this? I don't know. People don't want to count on inheritances, but it seems kind of crazy not have any plan in place. Is there a middle ground somewhere?
I think it's a good idea for any. I think that applies to any windfall though that you wind up with, whether it's an inheritance or a bonus or a bigger than expected tax refund. I think all of that stuff falls in the same category. And I think that when you're sitting down and talking about how you're planning your money, I think it does make sense to say, well, what happens if we get a windfall? How are we going to divide this up? And treat it like see if you can get to the point where like, yes, let's treat it like we treat the rest of our money.
I think also, though, I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to have that discussion beforehand, right? You know, that crazy uncle, you're not going to, while you're together, you're not going to go, well, what happens if he kicks off? What are we going to do?
Well, no, but you can sit down and say, you can sit down and you can say, this is what we do with all of our money. No matter where it comes from, who's earning it, this is what we do with all of our money. 10% goes to charity, this much goes, 30% goes to paying off debt, 50% goes to necessities, whatever it is. You can just say, this is what we do with whatever money we get, no matter the source.
See, just stick to the goal.
My point
if you talk about the goal, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No. I mean, the goal, I'll re-interrupt, so this way there's no talk about it. My point here is, the goal is important too, and I think that if you have an agreement and say, like, any windfall that comes, be it a bonus or an inheritance, that, this is what our plan should be. But I think there's a case, though, for inheritances to be an especially emotional event, right? I know sometimes an inheritance is even for a specific purpose, like, look, I don't want you to do this with it. I want you to go and do this, So sometimes there's a lot more attached to it than just the rational, well, now's a good time to pay off the car loan type of deal, when, that somebody special left you something that you didn't expect. So I can see that being a very difficult time or discussion, even trying to figure out what to do with the money also.
I can see that. I'm going to have to agree with Miranda about the idea of, you came up with these goals together. So there's money coming to the table, it basically just speeds you achieving your goals to a degree. But as for the emotional aspect, I definitely, you have to respect that. You don't know the circumstances with this inheritance, what happened in the relationship. So don't feel like you have to force an immediate decision either way. Take the step back. But I do think couples should at least consider, wait, didn't we come up with some goals together anyway? At least use a portion of that to reach those goals sooner.
Yeah, and I don't want this to turn into a windfall episode. I mean, we could certainly do a whole other episode about that. But I know a lot of people talk about, if you're going to get a big amount of money, earmark some of it for your goals, and then earmark some of it as fun money. It's okay to enjoy this a little bit without feeling guilty about it. And maybe that's the compromise you can make also.
Yeah, and if this is such, it's a large windfall, you can divvy it up. But then it goes again back to discussing it as a couple, and the situation. Like, each situation is going to be different, whether or not, like, you were very close to this relative, and like you mentioned, if they had a specific plan in mind on how their money is going to be spent, that's something you're not going to rush into. So don't feel like you have to make an immediate decision. That can, well, it's not going to get a lot of interest in savings, but just tuck it in savings until you decide, what your next step is. But again, as a couple, you can come up with a plan.
And that's kind of, you didn't want to do a windfall episode, but that's kind of the rule of thumb for like a large windfall is stick it in for 6 months and make a plan before you spend any of it. That's sort of the rule of thumb that's out there.
And again, talk about your mutual expectations for what you're going to do with money, because when you assume what your partner is going to be thinking about this, that's when you get into trouble, because you think, oh, they're going to think this thing about that money. And then you go and do that, and then, you find out later on they're really upset with you because that's not what they were thinking. So,
right, and that's with any of your money, no matter what it is, even with your money from work. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You have to keep touching base and keep reminding what's going on. I mean, one of the things that happens is as you progress in your marriage as well, you're going to change, and both people are going to change. And are you changing together? Are you changing toward the same goals? Are you progressing together? Because if you're not having that point where you check back in, whether it's about money or anything else in your life, if you're not having that point where you can check back in and say, yes, we're still moving toward the same goals, and even though we're changing together and progressing together. And you need to just touch base on that. So like Peter says, you don't suddenly end up surprised by what the other person wants to do.
So let's go. Well, I don't want to cut you off there, but
No.
I think we talked about it briefly. So let's go back before we're already in that committed relationship. At what point do you bring the money up? It's you're not going to do it 5 minutes into the first date and go, hey, by the way, what's your financial situation? Can we open up the books? But there are people who suggest something of that sort. At some point going, hey, by the way, what's your credit score? So at what point do you bring that into the conversation? And how do you start to play into that?
Bring sort of a new definition to like you show me yours, I'll show you mine type of deal.
like a financial tender, maybe. You just
I hate I feel like I'm repeating myself.
Swipe right.
I do think like the key is kind of maybe starting off with goals. Like when you're first going out, just say, what's your plan? And, a few years, do you plan on staying in the same city, the same job, and kind of start off there? Like, what are your, again, goals, for lack of a better word? What are your dreams? And see where they're going. Okay, so how do you think you're going to get there? It doesn't have to be an interrogation like how. In 6 months, where are you going to be at? Can you break this down for me? I need to know that you're committed. Yes. But, start off with that kind of like a soft pitch, see where they're at. I was, 21, and really, I didn't have a plan. I thought I had a plan. You never know, but it gives you something to think about. And as you go down in a relationship, check in again. Are they working towards that? And, you don't have to make it such a huge deal. You can just casually ask how they're doing, and are they moving closer or further? Maybe they changed plans, and then you can introduce, well, hey, I just saw this, or I saw this awesome podcast called Money Masterminds, and they got I'm going to try this out. What do you think? But you really can introduce something you've read, or an idea, and say, like, this is how I feel. What do you think? You're not putting any pressure on them, and you're getting their ideas on it, because again, most couples are different. So even if you might be on the same financial page, you're still going to maybe approach it differently. So just ask them, what do you think about this?
Yeah, and you even throw in where you're at. One goal, I'd love to buy a home, but you know what? I'm way down in student debt right now, so I don't know when that'll happen. But you just bring the subject out there and then open up the conversation at least.
Yeah, I think if you've been dating for a while or something, it's okay to talk about those things in generalities and just kind of say, I've got a little bit of debt, or whatever. But once it becomes more of a reality that you might be spending your life with this person or something along those lines, it might be a good idea to actually sit down and talk more about specifics. My wife and I, after we had gotten engaged, we actually went through a pre-marriage counseling session. Or it was several different sessions. A couple of them we sat down with a couple that had been married for 30 or 40 years and talked about certain topics, and money being one of them. And then we actually talked with a spiritual advisor as well for a couple of sessions. And again, money came up in one of those. So if you're thinking about having a long-term relationship, you may want to think about sitting down with someone like that, a counselor or whatever, and actually talking about those types of things in a safe situation where you feel like you can share all those things.
Well, I think having that third person probably helps too, because they can act as sort of a mediator between the two of you, and many of us behave better in front of somebody else. So you'll have less of an inclination to say something that you're probably going to regret later.
That's true. And it's also nice to have a buffer and someone who can see the two of you talk it out and maybe offer suggestion on better approaches. But definitely, if this is someone you think that you want to spend your life with, I say start the conversation, because money, as much as it's just a tool, it can either be one of the great parts of your relationship or one of the horrible parts. It's like this extreme situation. So, you really want to address it as soon as possible.
Be a tool, or it can be a weapon too. So you got to be careful.
Yeah.
And
basically, greases the wheels for anything. Anything you want to do, you're going to have to, most of it, you have to use money. So get it over with as soon as you can.
And I think also, like, if you're afraid to bring it up,
Mm-hmm.
and trust this other person that you want to be in a steady relationship in, then maybe that's like a warning sign in itself. Not so much that the money's out there, but that you can't bring up the subject that's for some reason you're afraid to. Mm-hmm. What else might be out there if you can't discuss this? And then that's, I think, maybe the importance of making it something that's so open and transparent also. So I think we've done a great job here of talking about money and how to deal with it with your significant other, either before the relationship or while the relationship is happening. And what we like to do here is we like to do a final word as we go around, and everybody can give their summary of what they think about our topic. And we'll start with Tom. What do you think about, or what's your final word on what to do when your partner has different spending habits than you?
Well, I think most of this episode comes down to the same thing as communication. You got to talk to them ahead of time, just like any other thing, before you get married and everything. But you got to keep up talking to them throughout your relationship too. Like if you guys aren't talking, that's when the problems will happen. The more open you are with communication, just like anything else in marriage, the better it'll be.
And Peter, what's your final word?
Well, my final word is just to make sure that you talk about your mutual expectations for money when you're getting into that long-term relationship. Money can be an explosive issue, not just because money issues are emotional and so forth, but because they often mask, it's just a surface issue a lot of the time, and there's much deeper issues that need to be explored. So sit down and talk with your significant other about your mutual expectations for money, set goals, set a budget, and make sure you're constantly communicating about those.
Miranda, your final word?
Ditto. Yeah.
That is a final word, so yeah.
The final word.
No, just
word.
And do it before you're in do it so that you're not surprised when you're in this relationship and now you've become one, and now you're like, wait a minute. Just do it early on there before you start actually combining your finances. Make sure you have that talk and make sure you're on the same page.
And Kyle, what is your final word?
A bit of a specific concern. I'm just looking for reasons to blow things up tonight, apparently. But a bit of a specific concern. Being in the school system, I tend to see the sort of new blended family dynamic that's becoming more and more common. And with blended families, specifically talk about how you and your kids, how you guys handle money between the two of you, or however many of you there are. Because I've noticed it puts a real tension on brand new families that already have a lot of dynamic stuff going on in them, and just maybe come to some sort of agreement where things are going to be, some sort of expectations are going to be set across the board. If you're going to do the blended family thing, it'll save you a lot of problems down the road.
And Elle, your final word on what to do when your partner has different spending habits than your own.
Well, I guess I'm a hopeless romantic. I really do think, if you're committing yourself, to this relationship and you want it to work, you really owe it to both of you to be open and honest with each other. And yes, it might start off very awkward. It might be difficult. But this is an opportunity for you to draw closer together and to work it out and to find a way to be respectful to each of your own styles and come up with your own financial system that reflects your relationship and your goals.
Thank you, Elle, for joining us. For those out there that may not be on top of things yet, tell them a little bit about Couple Money and the Couple Money podcast.
So basically, I started this about 5.5 years ago because, like we talk about, money is an emotional topic, and then you add that extra layer of another person in the relationship with an equal say. And, you know, I wanted to talk about how do you find that balance. I do believe that there is a way that you can build up your marriage and your finances, and we discuss it on Couple Money and on the podcast, and, you know, break it down. Even though every couple is different with DNA, there are certain principles that we can all follow to help one another communicate better about money.
Thanks again, Elle, for joining us, and thank you everybody that's out there that listens and watches. And until next week, be good with your money.
Thanks for joining us on the Money Mastermind Show. Get more information at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Google+.